What's up, my wizards? Deb, that's the mtg channel down there. We're on YouTube and stuff. Best thing ever, maybe, happened today, for the channel at least. We received a community spotlight on Wizards' freaking website. That's ridiculous. Like, the magic website. We got a community spotlight on that. Just probably the best thing that's like ever happened in the world. So, and thank you guys. That was cool because it's mostly you that got us there. We just hit 16,000 subscribers to celebrate all of these things, and we're just barely over a year old now. We're like 13 months old, so happy anniversary to the channel. Let's celebrate all those things by doing something very, honestly, very in the spirit of the channel, and something I've been asked to do a lot lately, and that's talk about Pauper. What is Pauper? A lot of people know, a lot of people don't know. It's basically a format that is more or less exclusive as far as the tournaments go to mtgo, Magic the Gathering Online. But there's a lot of local level Pauper games going on, more and more day by day. You know, it's really catching fire as a format. A lot of people love budget formats, and that's what this is. Basically, the only real rule, and there is a banned list, but the only real rule as far as the format goes is that you can only play cards that have been printed at the common level on mtgo. That's the only real rule. If it's been printed at, you know, only uncommon or only rare, then you can't play it. But if it's ever been printed as a common, you can. That leads to some really, really cool stuff. And I like the makeup of this format because most constructed formats are shaped from the professionals on down, but this is an mtgo format, so there's a lot more room for, you know, interpretation, and there's a lot of funky decks in Pauper and stuff. So that in mind, today we're gonna just do the top 10 decks in Pauper. Something that, you know, we do decks, we do budget decks, we love Pauper, so let's put it all together and do that. Before I get to the decks in earnest, just two things about the Pauper format that are important to remember if you're trying to get into it especially. First of all, the color wheel, or the color pie, whatever you want to call it, is in full effect here. If a color is known for doing something, blue draws cards, it has flying creatures, black has removal, you know, red has fast creatures, things like that, then it will be completely, fully represented in Pauper. The only other thing you need to remember if you're trying to get into Pauper is that Pauper is a very fast format, at least on mtgo. You would think that mostly commons would end up being a turtley format, and there are some control decks. There is a weird combo deck that's actually really, really good right now and is sort of mid-rangey. But for the most part, decks are incredibly fast. So that's important to remember. Let's talk about decks. Let's talk about decks, baby. Honorable mention before I get into the actual top 10 here. Because this deck doesn't pop up a whole lot in top 8s or anything, but it is a tier 2 or 3 deck that just needs 1 or 2 cards to really push it over the top here. And a lot of people are looking at it. This is Armadillo Cloak. Selesnya Armadillo Cloak. There's a Naya Armadillo Cloak deck. You know, it's mostly just going to be Selesnya, however. This is basically just a hexproof and auras deck. A Build-A-Bear deck, they like to say. Uses creatures like Solana Ledgewalker, Gladecover Scout, and Slippery Bogle. That's sort of the core of the creatures, and sometimes it'll play a couple of 2-ofs or 1-ofs of other things. But those 3 creatures right there on your screen, the core of the deck right here. And it'll play very, very good auras, like obviously Armadillo Cloak, which is freaking ridiculous, Ethereal Armor, and a couple of other things, but those are sort of the 2 big ones. Rancor is also a very popular card in the deck. So yeah, I mean, basically you're cut and dried, you know, hexproof, build a battleship kind of deck. Selesnya Armadillo Cloak, as we built it here, is only going to cost you about $25 in the paper edition. On Magic Online, it's going to cost you way less than that even. All these decks will. I'm just giving you the paper prices for them on TCG Player. About 25 bucks, that's not too bad. Let's get into the list in earnest though. Number 10 is definitely Burn. Burn is always going to be an important deck in Pauper because of all the amazing burn that's been printed at the common level. You've obviously got Lightning Bolt, that's been printed at common. That's a very important card in Pauper in general, and really in all of Magic. Searing Blaze is very important. Chain Lightning was printed at common, and honestly, if you want to cut the price of the deck in half, don't play the Chain Lightnings. There's plenty of other common level things to play. Fire Blast is an important card in general in Pauper as well, often used as a finisher, and just really good, especially in a burn deck. It doesn't care about losing its 2 mountains. Fire Bolt is also pretty good. The flashback on it is indispensable. And then Rift Bolt can be cast for just the 1 mana. So just really, really good common level burn in red. So that just makes for obviously a good burn deck. Burn is a viable strategy in almost any metagame, and Pauper no different at all. And we get to play a couple of cool creatures in Keldon Marauder or Marauders and Kiln Fiend. Kiln Fiend is a popular card in multiple formats. It's sort of the first prowess creature in some ways, you know. Still really important even in modern in some decks, you know. There are some modern decks that play this. But in Pauper, it's just incredible. Like 3 or 4 important decks play Kiln Fiend for good reason. And Keldon Marauders just deals a lot of damage in a very short amount of time. We used to call this Anime Fan Club back in the day. I don't know why. That's just a name that stuck for this card. But just, again, tons of damage output in a couple of turns. It dies, but it's almost like a burn creature in some ways. Just about $100 for this deck, which is the highest price that you'll pay for a Pauper deck by a good little bit. But again, you don't include the chain lightnings, you cut that price in half and you'll spend about $50 on the deck. And there's other stuff that you can play in this slot. Number 9, let's go ahead and completely switch gears here. Number 9 is Teachings, or Mystical Teachings. That's the card it's named after. It's a blue-black control deck that plays like a toolbox deck. It's going to play a lot of 1 and 2 ofs, mostly removal and counter spells, and it's going to play Mystical Teachings so that we can search those up twice at most. Mystical Teachings was a really good deck when that card was in Standard, and was in the Toast deck as well, you know, the 5-color control deck with cool ultimatum and stuff. Mystical Teachings is just a very powerful card when it was in Standard, and now it's in Pauper, printed as a common, it's great. Like, Mystical Teachings is one of the better tutors, like, ever. Honestly, like top 10 tutors maybe. Mystical Teachings is just a perfect card for Pauper. Deck plays a couple of important 1 and 2 ofs, and a lot of 1 and 2 ofs honestly, but a couple of very important ones. It usually plays at least a 1 of Capsize in the deck, so we can just bounce all of their things late in the game. Capsize looks pretty innocuous, but if you've never played against it, the card is very frustrating to play against because they'll end up being able to bounce more than one thing a turn, and you can't keep up with that sort of output. So really tough to play against, and then usually they'll win off of Gurmag Angler in this deck. Just a huge creature. We play a bunch of instants and sorceries and stuff. We'll be able to easily delve away this for just 1 mana. So just a good solid body that can often in the game we can back it up with counter spells. And Teachings is a fairly cheap deck to build. It's only about $35 to build the version of the deck that's going to be in the description here. In case I haven't mentioned that yet, check the description because there's going to be a deck list for every single deck that I mention here. That's pretty cool, I would say. But Teachings fairly cheap to build, and for the control player, it's one of the better decks you can build in the entire format. And it's really one of the only slow, super turtle-y kind of decks that wants to go very, very late. If you're that kind of player that likes to play a ton of removal and a ton of counter spells, this is the one for you. And if you've never played Mystical Teachings or weren't playing Magic when that card was in Standard, it feels really powerful when you tutor something and then the very next turn flash it back and tutor something else. Mystical Teachings is ridiculous. Number 8 is Goblins. There's a Goblins deck in every single format, right? But there's a ton of really good common Goblins, you know? First of all, we get to play Foundry Street Denizen, which has proven to be ridiculous. In every format we can play it, and Foundry Street is very, very good. Goblin Bushwhacker is an important card in some modern Goblin decks and translates pretty well here. Goblin Cohort is good. Mog War Marshal, another card that was really fun to play in Standard. It's like a mini siege gang commander, you know. And it works to great effect in this deck, especially if you're able to pay the Echo and get the token when it dies. Lots of value there. And then the excellent Sparksmith as well. Sparksmith is a form of removal, and even though we can take a chunk of damage ourselves off of it, it'll always take out the best creature on their side of the board and allow our dudes to swing through. Not to mention we get to play all the burn that I just mentioned a couple of decks ago if you want to. So Goblins is actually a really important deck in the meta right now, and just very, very fast. Plays a ton of 1-drop creatures and 1-drop burn spells too. Not really too many cards in the deck that even cost the 2 mana. It's incredibly fast. Best news is Goblin's only going to cost you about $25. A lot of these, you know, common Goblins I've seen expanded print runs. They've been printed more than a couple of times, you know. So a lot of these cards end up being cheap. And if you don't play Lightning Bolts, which can get fairly expensive, the deck can be very, very cheap to build. So, and you know me, I've built like 3 Goblins decks for the channel in the year that we've been around. So I love Goblins and I love Mono Red Aggro. This is just a great deck in this format. Classic deck too. And it's really just probably the best pure aggro deck in the format. Number 7 is just mono black. Straight up mono black value, you could call it. It's sort of a mid-range deck. You don't see those every day, but black gets to play a lot of really high value creatures and a lot of really, really good removal as well. And that's very conducive to a format like Pauper, especially all the removal. There's really two kinds of decks in Pauper. Very fast, heavy creature-based decks, and decks that play a ton of removal, and that is sort of, we're splitting differences here, you know, we're splitting the difference. We're going to play a lot of really good, efficient creatures, like Chittering Rats. Chittering Rats is just, again, like Capsize earlier, very frustrating card to play against, although it's innocuous when you first read it. Actually play against this in a game situation, and it is a jerk to play against. Phyrexian Rager, just incredibly high value, you know, being able to draw the card when it comes into play. Drawing cards, very, very good in Pauper. And Grey Merchant of Asphodel, too. Grey Merchant is just one of the best black creatures that could have possibly been printed for this format, honestly. Usually going to be a finisher for you after you've cleared the board off with some removal. And, you know, you played a couple of tricks. A lot of our creatures in this deck are tricky, like Chittering Rats, for instance. But this can just deal a ton of damage and get you back into the game pretty easily by, you know, gaining 6, 8 life even. So mono black just has so much going for it. It's not a very highly synergistic deck, even though it does have Grey Merchant. That's, you know, devotion and synergy. But really not a high synergy deck, just plays a lot of really good cards. The deck's going to cost you about $50 to build. Not too shabby. It's one of the more expensive Pauper decks to build. Not one of the mega expensive ones like Burn or one of the ones we're coming up here. But, you know, middle level expensive to build. And it's going to go for pretty much ever. It's a self-perpetuating deck. Black gets a lot of the best commons almost every set that comes out. You know, it's just really good solid removal in black commons. So, you know, draft and limited environments revolve around things like that. So the deck gets, you know, better and better and gets interesting choices with every new set that comes out. Monocolored decks in Pauper have that sort of advantage, you know. So yeah, mono black, just really, really reliable deck that just plays amazing cards. That's the whole philosophy. Number 6, we're going to call Angler of Secrets. This is a Delver of Secrets deck, which you will see a lot of. There's a ton of Delver decks. And this one thinks, you know, we play Delver, that means we have to play a lot of cheap instants and sorceries and such. So why don't we take advantage of that and also play Gurmag Angler. If we're playing all those cheap spells, we can play Gurmag Angler for 1 or 2 a lot of the time. So really easy to do. You get a 3/2 flyer in Delver of Secrets very quickly, and you get a 5/5 body out of Gurmag Angler also very quickly. And the deck gets to play things like Preordain, Ponder, and a lot of those, you know, common level cards that just draw a card for a mana, you know, and sometimes do other stuff too. So just really highly effective deck that plays 2 of the best creatures in the entire format. Number 5 is Jeskai Metalcraft, also referred to as Koldatha, confusingly. I have no idea why it's called that. But Koldatha gets to play a lot of really good cards in the format as far as Metalcraft goes, especially. We get to play Galvanic Blast, we get to play Glinthawk, both incredibly important and fast cards in the, especially for Pauper, just very good. And we get to also have access to a lot of really good blue card draw. You know, the deck will often play like Mold Drifter and Preordain and stuff like that. And we get to play red and white removal. You know, we get to play Journey to Nowhere and Lightning Bolt and stuff. So just a lot of really good options. This is yet another sort of janky deck that just really comes together by playing a lot of the best cards in the format. Altogether, the deck's going to cost you about $40, which is really on the middle end of a lot of these Pauper decks. And it's really fun. It's a unique deck. It's a different deck, you know. It's got a lot of cool things going for it. We get to play a lot of really good cards and still have some synergy. You know, usually decks that just play all the best cards have 0 synergy. This, a little bit of both. Number 4 is Mono Blue Tempo, we'll call it. This deck also plays Delver of Secrets, but isn't strictly a Delver of Secrets deck. This deck reminds me of sort of the Fish deck. You know, just straight up tempo, play small guys and disrupt their creatures, you know, or disrupt their play in general. So to that end, we get to play obviously Delver of Secrets. Spellstutter Sprite is a very important card for the deck. It's usually only going to be, you know, a counter spell for they have to pay 1 mana. But that's really important in this format. It's usually going to counter things in the first couple of turns. We also play Ninja of the Deep Hours, which is an incredible creature. I love Ninja of the Deep Hours. I'm glad that it's seeing play somewhere. We also get to use a lot of bounce, a lot of counter spells to sort of, again, disrupt their basic plan. Mostly we're going to be bouncing their dudes and swinging through for, you know, incremental damage. 3 damage one turn, 5 damage the next, 6 damage the next, you know, and just ultimately win the game through controlling their tempo. Overall, the deck's going to cost you about 40 bucks to build. Again, just on the middling end, you know. But it's also a self-perpetuating deck. Blue gets a ton of good commons, like pretty much every set that comes out. Cards that draw cards, cards that bounce creatures, you know. Just recently in Battle for Zendikar, we saw Clutch of Currents, Rush of Ice. These are both very good blue commons that could see play in Pauper in a deck like that's based around Delver, for instance. Just really good tempo cards, you know. So blue is ever expanding its base of fantastic commons. So something like this, you know, you build it once and you just add on to it every set. Number 3 is it Delver? Red-Blue Delver is fantastic, and this will be the last, I believe, Delver deck that we cover here, thank God. But Delver is probably the most important card in Pauper. It's at least in the top 2 or 3. So just remember that. If you don't want to play against Delver of Secrets, don't play Pauper because it's all over the place. But Red-Blue Delver gets to play something else cool, not only in Kiln Fiend, I've already talked about how good that card is, and obviously good in something like this, but also Nivix Cyclops. Nivix Cyclops can get very, very big very quickly, and we are playing to that end. We play a lot of cards that have Phyrexian mana in their cost, especially things like Ataxian Probe. We also play Mutagenic Growth. You know, these are basically free spells. And we also play a ton of 1-mana blue and red spells. You know, we've got Burn, we've got, you know, things that bounce, we've got Dispel in the deck. Just really, really good 1-mana stuff. So make sure, and we've got also Teamer Battle Rage, which does cost 2, but can put, you know, a Kiln Fiend or a Cyclops just completely over the top for a billion damage, effectively. So, yeah, the deck basically plays like, you know, a blue-red prowess deck in this standard, but is very effective at doing that. It's going to deal a ton of damage very fast. Overall, the deck's going to cost you about 50 bucks to build, a little bit higher than the last couple of decks I mentioned, but still doesn't break the bank, obviously. And unless they ban Delver, which they might, Delver is in a lot of Pauper decks, sort of taking over the format. But, you know, until they ban Delver, we'll say that. This is the premier way to play a Delver deck in the format, I think, you know. Just a lot of the cards the deck wants. Draws a lot of cards, has a lot of burn, hello Ziggy, and just is very effective at doing what it's trying to do. My number 2 is Teamer Tron, a deck list that has moved up quite a bit lately. This deck has been all over the place. And Teamer Tron is probably my favorite deck in Pauper. It's probably not the best deck right now, but it is definitely my favorite deck. Basically, really funky idea here. We're going to play a card you've likely never heard of unless you've been exposed to the Pauper format, and that's Fangren Marauder. Basically, we're going to play a ton of eggs, which are things like Chromatic Star, Chromatic Sphere, and other artifacts that we can break, or artifacts that cost a very, you know, 1 mana, sometimes even 0. But mostly artifacts we can break that go to the graveyard and gain us a large amount of life off of Marauder. We can go very long in the game and eventually play an Ulamog's Crusher, which will almost always end the game for us. So, and we'll end the game at like, you know, 50, 60 life or more a lot of the times. And Fangren Marauder has a big old body on him himself, and sometimes he can swing for the win. And once you have a couple of him out on the board all at once, things get absolutely ridiculous. And obviously, we are playing Tron. That's part of the name. We're playing all the Urza's lands because we want to play Crusher. We want to play Fangren Marauder, which is a fairly slow card in the format. But once we start cracking those eggs and getting 5 life apiece, things get amazing. Like, we can really last a long time. There are going to be turns where we gain 20 life in 1 turn. Super easy. So the deck is really weird, and it's probably the most unique deck in the format, like, by a lot right now. But you get what you pay for. That's the rule in Magic. 80 bucks for this deck, which isn't the most expensive deck I've talked about or anything, but is like the second most. And if you didn't play the Chain Lightnings and Burn, it would be the most expensive. But 80 bucks is sort of worth it, unless they ban any of the elements, mostly Fangren Marauder. But I don't see them doing that. I think Wizards sort of likes the sort of niche place that this deck is found. And, you know, it's not every day you see an all-commons combo deck, although we've done them on the channel before. But it's not often you see an all-commons combo deck, you know. Just really, really interesting, if nothing else, and is really janky looking, probably the jankiest looking deck in the entire format, but actually performs, and especially lately has gotten like 3 spots in top 8s fairly routinely. So watch out for this one. Really good deck. Number 1, hate to say it, but it's Affinity. Of course it's Affinity. Why wouldn't it be Affinity? We get to play things like Frogmite and Mirror Enforcer, sure. But we also get to play Atog in this format, which is really good, it turns out, because we're playing Fling as well. Not to mention 30 some odd artifacts, not counting all the artifact lands in the deck. So it's like over half the deck is artifacts. You make an Atog like 26, 26, and then you fling it at them for game. It's that easy a lot of the time. But if not, you can't just get the fling damage off and win the game that way. We've also got a bunch of creatures that can win the game for us, and we play a ton of artifacts super fast. And pretty good news here, the deck's only about $50, which is, you know, sort of on the middling to high end of Pauper, but still very much worth it. The thing is, they're not going to print too many more cards that are relevant to Affinity, but you never know, you know, they might print more, you know, 0 and 1 card artifacts that are very important for Affinity, but there's probably not ever going to be any more Affinity 4 artifacts cards. So your options are sort of set in stone as far as that goes, but I don't see the deck going anywhere anytime soon. Those are my top 10, really 11 Pauper decks. Stompy is also pretty good, so 12 Pauper decks, in case you're thinking about getting into the format. And there's a bunch of cards that I didn't even talk about that I would have liked to talk about. I've got more to say as far as Pauper goes at some point in the future, because I really like the format. It's obviously right up my alley. The spirit of the channel is mostly, you know, budget decks is something we're really known for. So Pauper is something that if you enjoy the channel, you'll probably really like. That's all I've got for now. This cat is being super adorable and you guys don't know. Like, look how cute you are. But anyway, I'm Dev from SBMTG. If you enjoyed the content, you know what to do. It's YouTube. Like, share, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff. Thanks for the 16,000 subscribers. Thanks for the amazing first year. Thanks for being the subscribers that made Magic, you know, MTG, Wizards of the Coast pay attention to us and put us, you know, in the spotlight. That was really cool of you guys, because that really was you guys that did that. As usual, you know how we end these things. I'm Dev from SBMTG, and thank you for watching, my wizards. Seriously, thanks. You guys are awesome.